Good afternoon and welcome to August's Lunch and Learn lecture. Thank you so much for joining us for what promises to be an exciting and engaging presentation. We're going to give everyone just a few more minutes to join the stream before we get things started. Hello, friends, and thank you for joining today's Lunch and Learn presentation. We're going to give folks just a few more minutes to join the stream before we get things started. Thanks for your patience. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maddie McCauley, and I work in the Programs and Outreach Department here at Enoch Pratt Free Library. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's Lunch and Learn program, which Pratt hosts in partnership with the Maryland State Archives and Maryland 4 Centuries Project. Before we get things started, I'd like to remind everyone that should you have any questions or comments for our presenter today, please enter them into the comment or chat box below the video, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. Without further ado, let me turn things over to our partner at the Maryland State Archives. Take it away, Owen.
Thank you, Maddie, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Owen Lurie, the Research Coordinator at the Maryland State Archives. We are back from our brief summer hiatus last month with a program today from Lauren Silberman entitled The Wild Women of Maryland. These Lunch and Learn lectures are an opportunity to hear stories of Maryland's people and to highlight the use of primary source materials and the value of archives in uncovering shared heritage. The Maryland State Archives holds records of permanent value of the state of Maryland and serves as the state's historical agency. If you are interested in exploring our records for your own research, I hope that you will come and check us out. You can contact us and schedule a research appointment on our website, msa.maryland.gov. I hope that you'll join us next month for a presentation from author Scott Shane called Flee North, A Forgotten Hero and the Fight for Freedom in Slavery's Borderland, about the development of the Underground Railroad in Maryland. It should be a fascinating event. You can find a full list of our programs, including videos of past presentations on our website And you can, of course, find more programs from the Pratt Library at prattlibrary.org. Now to introduce today's speaker, here's Bert Kummerow, founding director of the Maryland Four Centuries Project.
Thank you, Owen, and welcome everyone to our late summer Lunch and Learn lecture. All of us, the Maryland's Four Centuries Project, the Maryland State Archives, and the Enoch Pratt Free Library are here every month to bring you the very best research into Maryland's proud history. We're only a few months away from our country's 250th year, an anniversary where we plan to take stock of all of our history as we, the people, continue our quest for a more perfect union. There is a risk that much of Maryland's history could be ignored or even whitewashed. This federal administration appears to be planning to exclusively celebrate American exceptionalism, but we will also explore the challenges that our state and nation continue to face. We will be working with Maryland's anniversary efforts to remember its many generations of forefathers, as well as foremothers, and all of four people, taking both the good and disappointing examples. We will continue these monthly excursions into the important role of our state that has played in the development of our democratic experiment, and we call that experiment the United States of America. Today's lecture explores the stories of the neglected half of our body politic. Women were often called the weaker vessel, but we have stories of courage and bravery. Women's rights in the U.S. have been both hard-fought and significant to our success. After the passage of the 19th Amendment, our great-grandmothers and our grandmothers continue to fight for a place at the table. Those early pioneers include Labor Secretary Frances Perkins, an important author of the Social Security Act, and First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. Now, in 2025, it is both startling and satisfying to see that 26 women serve in the U.S. Senate and 13 are state governors. In the midst of this much-needed revolution, the forgotten stories of important women in our past are getting new attention. Some, like Harriet Tubman, Nancy Pelosi, and our recent Senator Barbara Mikulski, have become icons. Others, like Margaret Brent and Lily Carroll Jackson, are also part of the large and growing collection in the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame, now housed at Notre Dame of Maryland University. Our speaker today, Lauren Silberman, has taken another approach to these stories, searching out largely forgotten women from Maryland's past with unforgettable lives. She has put them into a collection that she calls Wild Women. Lauren has been working in cultural arts at a variety of settings for over 2 decades. She has a gift that we wish we all had, as she writes popular books about wicked Baltimore, the city's Jewish community, and now a group of wild women. She is bringing our ancestors to life. Recently, she has taken on the task of becoming a mystery writer. That indicates to me that Lauren has the imaginative spark to make history live for all manner of audiences. Please welcome Lauren Silberman.
Thank you so much, Bert. I would love to have you introduce me every single time because that was just incredible, and I am very grateful. I'm also very grateful to everyone who has signed up to join us today. I hope we're going to have a great hour together telling some stories. As was alluded to, there are some well-known ones. You see maybe Harriet Tubman or Wallace Simpson on the book cover here, but we're really going to focus on some of the lesser known tales. So this is Wild Women of Maryland, Grit and Gumption in the Free State. And let's get into it. All right. So first, the question is, what makes a wild woman? And the answer is someone does not have to be a role model. We can have someone who is tenacious, fierce, a trailblazer. They have to have a great story, which, to be fair, I'm pretty sure we all do. But I wanted to make sure that the book had a mixture of those better and lesser known stories. Like I said, there are, famous people like Harriet Tubman and Wallace Simpson, but most of the stories in here are ones that were new to me. And hopefully there's a couple of surprises in here for you too. And if there's a few that you have heard of, but that maybe some other people haven't yet, we'll be in on the surprise together. I also tried to pull people's stories from different parts of the state. Not surprisingly, the majority still do come from Baltimore. It's natural, being the most populous section of the state. But especially as we also tried to pull from different time periods, going back to the colonial period before Baltimore's even founded. There's opportunities to tell stories from all over and different aspects of diversity. Again, whether that's religious, whether that's someone's ethnicity or race. There's so many women that we try to touch on in what's not a particularly thick book, but there's so many more. We could certainly do a volume 2. All right, well, let's kick off with one of those stories that is not from Baltimore and is not a traditional role model. This is the story of Sarah Wilson, the fake princess. And I apologize in advance if you do hear my seat creak a little bit, or if you hear my dog in the background decide to wake up. But he is very unkindly snoozing through all of this as if it's not of interest to him at all. But I hope it is to you. So in 1771, William Duval of Bush Creek in Frederick County advertised searching for his runaway indentured servant, Sarah Wilson. He warned readers of the Pennsylvania Gazette that Sarah had, quote, changed her name to Lady Susanna Carolina Matilda. And I just want to stop right there and just say, every time I hear that name, I always think of Gilda Radner on Saturday Night Live and think of, like, what was her character's name? Like Rosanna Dana. It's just every time, Lady Susanna Carolina Matilda. Anyway, he goes on, quote, made the public believe that she was Her Majesty's sister. He went on to describe her in detail, pointing out that she, quote, has a blemish in her right eye, black rolled hair, stoops in the shoulders, and makes a common practice of marking her clothes with a crown. So, according to his description, Sarah was pretending to be English royalty, and he offered a reward for her return. This is one of the things Bert mentioned, that I also write fiction, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But one of the amazing things about writing nonfiction is that if I tried to write Sarah's story as fiction, no one would believe it because it just seems incredulous. So she had been born around 1750 in England. And Sarah actually became an aide to Caroline Vernon, a maid of honor herself to Queen Charlotte. Under Caroline's employ, Sarah not only learned the ways of the aristocracy, but she also managed to steal several of her employer's finery. In the British Gentleman's Magazine in 1773, it was described how Sarah had, quote, found means to be admitted into one of the royal apartments, took occasion to break open a cabinet, and rifled it of many valuable jewels. What's amazing is, so not surprisingly, she was caught. And then she was sentenced to death, which was common. But Caroline took pity on her and instead shipped Sarah out to the New World, where she ended up being sold as a convict servant, a type of indentured servant, to William Duvall here in Maryland. But that's not where the story ends, because it didn't take long for Sarah to escape. Soon she was traveling south, pretending to be Princess Susanna. Quote, she had carried with her clothes that served to favor the deception and had secured a part of the jewels, together Her Majesty's picture, reported the Gentleman's Magazine. So consider this. Somehow, Sarah had managed to leave England with additional stolen goods, including a miniature portrait of Queen Charlotte, which all helped convince people of her remarkable and absolutely ridiculous ruse. The magazine continued, recounting how, quote, she traveled from one gentleman's house to another under these pretensions and making astonishing impressions in many places, affecting the mode of royalty so inimitably that many had the honor to kiss her hand. She offered, quote, promotions of all kinds, the Treasury, Army, the Royal Navy. I mean, stop and think about this. People must have been so in want of these opportunities that they were willing to overlook how absolutely ridiculous a situation she had created. What princess travels across the colonies unexpected and alone? It's just mind-boggling. That being said, she wasn't always by herself. There are stories that connect her with Tom Bell, the alias of Patrick O'Connor, who defrauded people while pretending to be an Irish merchant. The Historical Society of Pennsylvania notes that, quote, for a short time, he introduced himself as Mr. Edward Augustus Montague, a gentleman of fortune and betrothed lover of Princess Susanna Carolina Matilda. You have to love these names, by the way. Edward Augustus Montague, the Princess Susanna Carolina Matilda. Well, William Duvall actually does catch his wily servant, but only for a short period, because she escapes again pretty quickly. Now, in 1775, Sarah actually marries Captain William Talbot of His Majesty's 17th Regiment of Light Dragoons. And while she may never have served traditional time for her crimes, marriage must have ended her antics, as she unfortunately slips out of the annals of history, much as she had from William Duvall. And I will say, I mean, it's a fantastic story, but one that we do see time and again with this, which is that people are, telling the stories of these women more than the women are getting to tell them stories themselves. So we hear from everyone else about Sarah's story except for her, which is unfortunate. That does change with some of the more recent stories we'll get into. But I do think it's notable because I wish so much I could hear her perspective on it. All right, let's continue on to another one. We'll go forward in time. I apologize. We're going to jump around a little bit chronologically, mainly because while nobody in here is my favorite story, that's also a complete and utter lie, because I do actually have a few favorites, and Virginia Hall here is certainly one of them. All right. I'm not even sure why I'm reading these since I do know them, but again, they're really good stories. So here's the thing. Virginia Hall had been born in 1906 in Baltimore, and she came from a well-to-do family, one that prized education and encouraged her to pursue her dreams, no matter how wild. And her dream was actually fairly wild getting into the 1920s and 1930s. She wanted more than anything else to become a foreign service officer. She ends up going to Europe and working in quite another number of countries for American embassies. So places like Italy and Estonia and all of these different places. And she keeps taking the test. And just as it's incredibly tricky to pass that test today, I can't even imagine how hard it would have been for a woman to pass it at that time. And she doesn't give up even when. So she, in 1933, she goes on a trip with some friends to Turkey, to Smyrna, Turkey, and they are hunting. She is chasing after her prey, and she is climbing over a fence when her rifle catches and it goes off and it shoots her foot. So she not only ends up losing her left foot, but she actually loses her leg up to her knee. But what's amazing is that she must have had a sense of humor about this, because she gets a prosthetic and she nicknames it Cuthbert, 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 which I love. I love that it also doesn't stop her from continuing to apply and continuing to work towards her dreams. Except eventually, by 1939, she realizes it's just not going to happen. She's been doing this for years. She's not going to get past clerical work in these embassies. She's not going to get accepted into the Foreign Service. It's just happening. Well, her paperwork allows her to remain in Europe for up to a year. And Virginia decides, well, let's go spend that time in France. She speaks beautiful French. Who doesn't want to be in France when you've got a visa, giving you that extra time? But if you noticed when I said this was 1939, you may be starting to put some dots together. Because yes, she was there in September of 1939 when Germany invades Poland. And she is there when France and England declare war against Germany. Suddenly, she's in the middle of a war zone. Now, Virginia hated the Nazis. She had already been hearing stories of how they treated Jews and seen the rise of anti-Semitism across the continent. And not surprisingly, she was unable to sit by and do nothing. She actually volunteers as an ambulance driver with what is the French version of the Red Cross. And she goes out to the front line. And yes, she's doing this with a prosthetic. She's still able to drive the ambulance and provide the services, joining quite a number of young women in doing this at the start of the war. She provides medical treatment to French soldiers. And there's actually a very sad story where she ends up tending to the brother of one of her driver friends. And unfortunately, he doesn't make it. After France surrendered to Germany, Virginia leaves for England, again becoming a clerk for the American embassy. And although the Germans attacked London several times, Virginia refused to return to Maryland. Her strength of character, knowledge of French, and American papers caught the attention of the British Special Operations Executive, a secret department akin to our CIA. And Virginia was offered a chance at her dream of becoming an agent, except for the British, not the Americans. But wanting to fight the Nazis however she could, she accepted. After some rigorous training, Virginia returned to France in 1941. Now, unlike other British agents, Virginia could actually operate freely in the country since America had yet to enter the war. She worked behind the scenes to help the French resistance grow. She was handling logistics of parachute drops, bringing in new agents, supplies, and securing safe houses. Meanwhile, she reported for the New York Post. And this is true. This isn't just something she pretended. She actually legitimately got a job as a journalist. And you can go into the archives and go look up stories from her. It's incredible. And having a cover story as a journalist comes in handy because it gives her a reason to be there and a reason to talk with people. Now, after America enters the war, however, Virginia became just as much of an outlaw as the other British agents. And the Germans soon began searching for the quote-unquote limping lady who kept interfering with their plans. They plastered up posters of Virginia. Her cover was blown. She needed to escape. Now, with few choices, Virginia had to trudge over the Pyrenees Mountains into Spain, a neutral country. The journey was perilous, given the high mountainsides, the deep snowbanks, and of course, the potential of being caught. And although her stump blistered and bled, she refused to reveal to her guide or traveling companions that she was an amputee. I write that she didn't want them to worry that she would slow them down, but I think honestly, she didn't want them to abandon her because, she was already a woman. She only has one leg. It's a big risk that they were bringing her on this really incredibly dangerous journey in the first place. And there's a strong chance that they would have just left her behind. And then, unfortunately, even after reaching Spain, she was caught. And of course, her papers are not marked properly. It's very clear she didn't come in the correct way into the country. So she actually spends most of December in jail. She befriends another prisoner there who is fortunate enough to be released and goes to the American embassy on Virginia's behalf. And after a few weeks, Virginia is freed. So she tries continuing her efforts in Spain. And of course, Spain has its own set of issues. That's an understatement of the decade at that time. But let's just say she didn't really feel like she was helping her friends back in France. Many of her allies there had been caught and were now imprisoned. And Virginia couldn't stand waiting around doing very little. Instead, she returned to England. Now, by this point, America's part of the war, of course. And so they had opened their own office in London called the Office of Strategic Services, a predecessor to the CIA. And the OSS asked Virginia to return to France, which she was very happy to do on behalf of America this time. So disguised as an old woman, she snuck across the English Channel in a motorboat before heading deep into the French countryside. There, Virginia found more people looking to resist the Nazis. She soon had upward of 1,500 men reporting to her. They blew up train tracks, arranged supply drops, spied on Nazi activities. And she risked her life making regular wireless transmissions back to London, which the Nazis could potentially trace. Now, after D-Day launched, Allied soldiers joined Virginia's efforts. Now, one of those soldiers was a Lieutenant Paul, and I always struggle with this, and I'm sorry because my mom speaks beautiful French, but I do not. Goillot, Paul Goya. I apologize, I butchered it. But he catches Virginia's attention, albeit in a non-military way. As the Allies advanced, Virginia and Paul actually get sent on missions together and deeper into Europe. Except in the spring of 1945, just before they started a new one, they learned it had been canceled because the Germans had surrendered. Following the war, France, England, and America showered Virginia with medals. She accepted them privately or in absentia because she wanted to remain undercover. She worked for the OSS and then, as I mentioned, its follower, the CIA. In 1950, she married Paul, and they retired to a farm in Barnesville, Maryland in 1966. Virginia passed away in 1982 at the age of 76. I think you can tell why that's one of the stories that I very much enjoy. But I love all of these. Like Sadie, like I said, we're skipping around a little bit in time because I just can't help myself. They're really fun, and Sadie is fantastic. She's not that much earlier though. This is a story that's going to start in the late 1800s. When you're flipping through a book you wrote, because you can't remember page numbers. It's all good. So Sadie Miller was in the 1880s a teenager at Western Maryland College, which today is McDaniel College, where she discovered a love for two different subjects, journalism and baseball. She'd gone to school with the hopes of becoming an actress, but became enamored with the relatively new sport of baseball, attending local games. Of course, it didn't hurt that she was falling for one of the players, Charles R. Miller. She never missed a game, even sometimes ditching class to catch one. So if people talk about kids today, you could say the same about kids in the 1880s. After graduating, Sadie began reporting for the Democratic Advocate in Westminster, which eventually led to a job with the Baltimore Telegram. Her new position combined her passions, and she began covering the recently created Baltimore Orioles. And she also ended up marrying that Charles guy. She recognizes the sexism of the time, so she actually uses her initials, SKM, as her byline. This hid her identity well enough that she was introduced to the president of the New York Giants, Andy Freeman, and he was like, "Oh, why, you're a lady." "I hope so," replied our quick-witted Sadie. But in addition to sports, Sadie reported on world events, and she took up photography, which really becomes very important for her. So there's a photograph she takes of 3 Spanish officers being kept in Annapolis during the Spanish-American War that ends up being published by Leslie's Illustrated Weekly, which at that time was an incredibly major national newspaper. So that photograph actually ends up leading to a position with Leslie's. And while working for Leslie, she started with, all sorts of things, military assignments, photographing top secret facilities. She became the first woman to cover the national political conventions. She traveled the globe. She hiked up the construction of the Panama Canal, covered earthquakes in Jamaica, San Francisco. She visited a leper colony on the Sandwich Islands. She went solo through mining camps in Alaska near the Arctic Circle. And her, at one point, she's in Germany in 1914, and she's captured and interrogated as a suspected spy. She also covers political royal news. She took the last photograph of Susan B. Anthony before her passing. But I think my favorite story from Sadie is one that brings us back to Maryland. This is in 1909. And she recounted one of her more unusual experiences driving through a Baltimore sewer. She writes, quote, being a housekeeper in Baltimore, and let's just pause there. She's nobody's housekeeper in Baltimore, but that's okay. Continuing on. I am naturally interested in any project which will better the sanitary condition. And when I learned that it was possible to travel in an automobile for 6 miles through this huge underground tube, I seized the opportunity and joyfully went into the great dark sewer with a party of 5 gentlemen who were actuated by the same interest. So she goes on to say, here the mouth of the sewer loomed up like a huge monster, ready to suck in the big automobile as it ran down the incline. We started underground. After a mile had been covered, we began to run around sharp curves which showed the real beauty and remarkable construction work. The air was heavy, and in some sections, a regular London fog shut out our view. Occasionally, we passed a manhole which had been left open for ventilation, but the dampness had already settled over the big tube, and there was something melodramatic about our surroundings. We drove slowly for the next 2 miles, fascinated by the very weirdness of the place. Water from recent rains had come in through the open manholes, and occasionally we were splashed with mud as the automobile went through the stream, which in many places covered the bottom of the sewer. Finally, we reached a point just below Chase and Durham streets, where 2 smaller sewers empty into the main pipe. Here, the automobile was to be turned, and Mr. Gilbert, the owner and driver, brought out his skids when, to our dismay, it was found impossible to turn the big machine. There was no alternative, so we started on the return trip to back out for more than 6 miles. Now, if you really want to be thrilled, just back out of the Baltimore outfall sewer. I have been in gloomy underground places, the very heart of coal mines, and far below the surface where men were bringing out gold. And I do not recall a like sensation to this backing out from the Baltimore sewer. For it always seemed that by the next turn, the wheels we would collide with the wall. We had scarcely gone a mile when bang, and Mr. Gilbert stopped the machine. Alas, the tire had exploded where there was plenty of water. Eventually, the group does make it out safely. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't have this amazing account from Sadie herself. And the underground expedition reminded her of her own childhood fantasy of digging a hole through her family garden. She tried a few times to carve out the passage using a pudding spoon beneath the honeysuckle bush. But the gardener, quote, objected to the uprooting of his favorite climber. Sadly, Sadie passed away from a stroke in 1920. And what's incredible is that throughout all of this, she rarely enjoyed prestige during her own lifetime, and was quickly forgotten in a lot of ways. It's actually a professor, Keith Richwine, who is at McDaniel College and rediscovers this remarkable alum, and brings to life this story, which I just am very appreciative, because it's an incredible, and as I mentioned earlier with Sarah Wilson, here we actually get to hear from Sadie herself, which I also deeply appreciate. I also forgot to mention that with Virginia Hall, there's been a lot more interest in her recently. There'd been one book written about her when I was researching this, but another one has come out, and there's been all sorts of talks of doing even more stories on her. And I think that would be just absolutely incredible. All right, let's do another one. Where are we going to next? Oh yeah, let's go to Violet. Yes, I love it. All right, Violet is over here. You know, you write the book and you tell these stories, and you still get excited about which one is coming up next, and all of them, because they're just a lot of fun. It's, you know, when you're growing up, so much of history is learning dates and places and wars. But researching this book and my experience working in museums, really fleshes out and shows you just the rich tapestry of stories that we have, even in our own backyard. It's just, there's just so many amazing people. And every time I tell these stories, I'm always hearing from people about amazing women or just amazing people in their own lives. And it's just absolutely makes my day. And Violet Hill Whyte is one of those, because Our Lady Law is pretty amazing. Back in 1937, she actually suits up as Baltimore's first African-American officer, male or female. Okay, now granted, she did not have a uniform. She didn't have a badge. She wasn't given a gun, but that did not stop her. So her commanding officer tells the Afro-American newspaper that her duties would be, quote, to assist in securing statements from women and minors arrested for alleged violations of the law, aid in clearing up domestic troubles among couples, make arrests, and be detailed in other districts whenever needed. Later on, though, she recalls how her supervisor set her out that first day, saying to her, quote, "There's no program here, no curriculum, so stretch your wings, young lady." And she told the Baltimore Sun in 1963 that she replied, "Yes, sir," I said. And I did just that. And it's difficult since then to draw them in again. Now, soon, Violet's involved with a good case, tracking down a potential murderer. 23-year-old Violet Key, who just happens to have the same first name, was accused of killing Charles Sales. And, the rookie policewoman found her suspect. The young woman would be sentenced to 6 years in the penitentiary for her crime. So she's seeing success straight out the gate. And although she primarily worked with juvenile and parental issues, Violet didn't shy away from, crimes like these, like murder and drugs. Quote, "I've never had any fear of the underworld," she told The Sun in 1955, "and none of the work can prove too hard for me." She shared how she went undercover as a dope user, walking the streets in a, quote, "simulated narcotic stupor," until she was approached by a dealer. She paid for drugs using marked bills. And when she returned to buy more, another dealer, suspicious of her, quote, "shoved an automatic in my face, nice and cold. I stumbled back over him and in a feigned narcotic mumble pleaded for his cigarette. I knew he believed me when he shoved his dirty, wet cigarette butt in my mouth and allowed me to leave with my purchases." Using the intelligence that Violet collected, federal agents soon raided the house and broke up the drug ring. Now, another time, Violet faced a 6-foot, 4-inch supposed religious prophet who was suspected of housing minor boys and giving them alcohol. "No woman," he said, "has ever set foot in the prophet's temple." He blocked the doorway to his home, holding his arms out wide. Although a small figure herself, alone and rarely armed, even at this time, Violet faced him undeterred. She simply walked into the house under his outstretched arm. "Prophet," she said, "there's always has to be a first time." Her work led to his conviction. During her career, Violet was always particularly interested in improving domestic relations and helping the younger generation. In 1954, she was quoted by the Afro-American as warning young people that they couldn't, quote, "sip cocktails, smoke incessantly, dance all night, and indulge in promiscuous sex relations and still make it in the world of today." Instead, she recommended that they work on, quote, "getting all the schooling you can, exposing yourself to wholesome experiences, and staying in good health." Well, that being said, she assured the youth that she wasn't suggesting they become, quote, Puritans, have a good time, but plan your good times. So, and again, I love that. Just like we said with Sadie, whenever somebody's saying kids of today, look at the kids in the 1950s, the kids in the 1880s. Kids will be kids. Teenagers will be teenagers. So, oh my goodness. So, and she worked all hours, day and night. She'd start between 5:30, 6:30 in the morning. She'd go for more than 12 hours. The woman's a machine. She handled upward, ready for this, 400 cases a month. Even when attempting to take her first vacation in 1938, she was called back in to arrest a man suspected of burglary. Of all those cases, Violet explained to The Sun in 1963, only, quote, 50 to 60 are charged and tried. Much of our time is given to investigation. Only after everything else has failed do we bring anyone into court, end quote. This one, this next statement, gosh, she has a career spanning 30 years and she never missed a day for being sick. I want her immune system. Within 2 years of being hired, she was promoted for the first time, and over her career would receive several more promotions and commendations, including becoming a sergeant in 1955, at the time, she was only the third woman in the entire state to attain such a position. By the time that Violet passed away in 1980, at the age of 88, she, not at 88, but when she retired, she had reached the level of lieutenant. Now, to be clear, Violet comes from an incredibly successful family. Her parents include teacher and former lecturer for the Women's Christian Temperance Union, Margaret Pearl Hill, and her father is Reverend Daniel G. Hill of Bethel AME Church over on Druid Hill and Avenue and Lanville Street. Violet was one of 10 children. Now, out of the 9 who survived to adulthood, all of them graduated high school, and many went on to college. And if you heard, this is back in the 1920s and the 1930s. Most of her siblings went on to be exceedingly successful, deans of universities, teaching at schools. Violet herself graduated from what at the time was Coppin State Teachers College, now Coppin State University. She began as a teacher and social worker. It's amazing. She gets married to George S. White, himself a principal of School 127 in Baltimore. And somehow in the midst of all of this, they raised children too. And her work paves the way for others. The city hires another African-American policewoman in 1942, Carolyn Fletcher Robinson. She gets recognized with commendations from all levels. They nicknamed her Lady Law. Judge Charles E. Moylan called her a, quote, one-woman police force and one-woman social worker combined. And the skill that she brings to court in presenting a case is outstanding. She can do more work in an hour than an efficiency expert can do in 3. Yet it was another tribute that Violet fondly remembered to the son in 1955. A second grader came up to her and asked, "How can I become a good policewoman like you?" So, these are just some of the stories. I have more, but I also am recognizing that it is already 10 of 2. And so I don't know, to Maddie, Owen, Bert, if we want to move over to some questions, or if you want me to do another story, which would you prefer?
We could probably do one more story if you want, Lauren.
Yeah, sure. Let's do it. I got it ready. Let's do Jackie. It's summer months here. Okay, so it's been an unusually comfortable August, but let's go somewhere nice and cool anyway. And it doesn't get much more cool than Antarctica. Edith, quote, Jackie Roan, a Baltimore native, prepared to wish her husband, Finn Roan, goodbye in 1947. He was getting ready to lead a research expedition to Antarctica. And the expedition of 21 men planned to survey the icy continent's last remaining unexplored coastline. Now, Finn convinced Jackie to join him as far south as Panama, knowing it would be a full year before they would see each other again. However, when they reached Central America, Finn asked Jackie to join him in Antarctica. At first, she assumed he was kidding, but soon realized he was serious. Although she wasn't packed or prepared for such an adventure, she told him she would consider his request, knowing she'd have to decide by the time they reached Chile, which was the last stop before leaving civilization behind. Now, she discussed the option with her friend, Jenny Darlington, who was also on board with her new husband, Harry, one of the expedition's pilots. A few women had visited Antarctica before, but none from the United States, and certainly never for a full year. However, if Jenny would come, then Jackie decided she would go too. Well, Jenny agreed. In South America, Jackie sent word back to her boss at the Department of State that she was resigning. They actually offered to hold her job for the year, but she felt that was unfair to the agency. She requested that he refill the position. Now, the ship reached Antarctica in March 1947, landing at Stonington Island in Marguerite Bay. Finn had constructed a base there during a previous expedition in 1939 through 1941, known as the U.S. Antarctic Service Expedition, if you're, need some trivia. However, other nationalities had wrecked it. In the interim, the group spent roughly 2 months making the space habitable, just in time for the winter months to hit. Since, as you know, Antarctica is in the southern hemisphere, and they have the winter when we have summer. Jackie documented their trip, writing articles for the North American Newspaper Alliance, or NANA, and helping Finn with a book about its journey and in findings. She also helped out with day-to-day operations, everything from cleaning, knitting, anything else she could offer. She endured long days, snowed into a base that was rarely well heated. Confined in a difficult environment, tensions rose among the team, especially between Finn and Harry, her friend's husband. In her diary, Jackie kept a record of their personality clashes, which ultimately culminated in Harry resigning. Mind you, when you resign in a snowed-in port or base in Antarctica, it's not like you can leave. So you're still all stuck there together. Incredible. Jackie also chronicled unexpected treats, such as entertaining visitors from the nearby British base, enjoying the evening movie reel, meeting penguins, raising a husky puppy, which she named Casco, and taking classes from other crew members in navigation and radio. She helped manage the seismograph and the radio itself when others were away on missions, and conducted her own hydroponic experiments, even managing to grow watercress in a sub-zero climate. The crew radioed her articles back to Nana, and they often made the front page of the New York Times and other major national newspapers. She shared the expedition's triumphs, including successfully photographing some of the last uncharted territory on Earth. And there are several close calls, such as near fatal falls by crew members into icy waters and crevasses, missing men who were finally rescued after several long days, and a British plane crash, which everyone aboard amazingly survived. One of the areas explored was actually named Edith Roan Land in her honor. Okay, so later on, they discovered that the quote-unquote land was actually an ice shelf, and the place would eventually be renamed the Roan Ice Shelf. But that ice shelf is twice the size of the state of Texas. Combined with another ice shelf, it's the second largest on the planet. It's the size of these things are incredible. Now, Jackie and the crew left in February 1948 after a difficult but ultimately successful expedition. She recapped her accomplishments in a memoir, Antarctica's First Lady, writing, quote, "Here is the last unknown coastline in the world was delineated. It stretches from the peninsula to the southernmost point in the Weddell Sea to Coates Land, a distance of about 450 miles. Scientists at the base and out in the field with dog teams conducted investigations in 11 branches of science. The pilots discovered new mountain ranges, glaciers, extensively photographing them. Quote, our 3 planes had flown a total of 356 hours, covering 39,000 miles, and mapped over 450,000 square miles of previously uncharted territory." She actually returned to Antarctica several times before her death in 2009. She ended her memoir remembering a return cruise 50 years later from the time she had initially left, writing, "Along with their parents, my grandchildren went with me in early 1998 as the fourth generation in Antarctica." See, Finn's father had been an early explorer there. So this is really a family legacy. I have often tried to stay in the background as to not overshadow my remarkable husband. But when those around me toasted me as Antarctica's first lady, in many ways, I wondered if at my age I shouldn't simply accept applause and smile sweetly. So I did. So, so many fun stories to say. So maybe we can get into questions if you'd like. I often get a lot of questions about researching the book. So I did go ahead and put something up here about what I had done. I made sure to read similar books. I wanted to be different and fill in gaps. And there aren't that many books celebrating Maryland's women. There are some. There are a few, but there's always room for more. I spoke to friends who worked at museums, archives, libraries, including the Enoch Pratt Free Library and the Maryland State Archives, as well as what used to be the Maryland Historical Society, now the Maryland Center for History and Culture. And University of Maryland also has a Maryland room as well. So there's a lot of great resources and repositories across the state. I use a lot of databases. One of my favorite is actually using my Pratt Library card to access the newspaper databases because there's so many that have been digitized. And you could do a lot of research and get those primary and secondary records, which is just great because there's the full run of the Baltimore Sun, the Afro-American, and Washington Post, and so many more. And I could access it anywhere just with my library card. As well as going to these places in person and using things like finding aids and talking to people. It's just, there's a lot of things. And sometimes I'd even just do a plain old Google search. I might be like, Maryland woman spy, and, during XYZ war, and see what popped up. And then also, of course, I would look at books and I would follow their endnotes. Those are kind of a little treasure trail that you can use to get to other sources. Finally, how did I get involved in this? As well, you heard at the beginning that I've worked in museums. I don't work in museums now. I'm actually with a different nonprofit. But I worked in a lot of museums, including many here in the state. I also I've written other history books. You can see the cover of Wicked Baltimore there, as well as the Jewish Community of Baltimore. And then, as you heard in my introduction, I also write mysteries, but I do that actually under a pen name called Daphne Silver. And I write about a rare books librarian who finds books and bodies where they don't belong along the Chesapeake Bay. So it's a lot of fun. The first one, Crime and Parchment, was the Agatha Award winner for Best First Mystery in 2023. For 2023. So that was really exciting. And lastly, if you want to reach out to me and get in touch, I'm a Marylander, so I'm around. You can visit my website. You can email me. I also have a website for Daphne Silver, which, believe it or not, is just daphnesilver.com. So either way, I would love to connect. So great.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for a really fun and interesting presentation this afternoon. You covered a lot of our questions from viewers through by proxy through your slides around research and your research process. To dive a little bit deeper, some folks were asking if you have connected with any living relatives of the subjects that you covered in your book, and if so, did they have any anecdotes to share, and did you incorporate those in your books at all?
So that's a great question. And actually, having just spoken about Jackie, I got in touch with one of her daughters, with Karen Roan Tupek, and she actually even gave me the permission to use some of the photos. Gave me photos and things that I could use in the book. I mean, look how absolutely glamorous Jackie is. I mean, it's just, look at her puppy, everybody. So adorable. So I thought that was so incredibly sweet of her to do. So that's one example. Unfortunately, in a lot of cases, the stories might be too old or so, but this one was a perfect example, because I love celebrating her mother's story that way. That was so sweet. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and likewise, you kind of danced around this, but when you were selecting individuals, how did you kind of come up with the people you wanted to highlight, and what type of stories you wanted to tell?
Yeah, so like I said, I wanted to try and not repeat all the stories. I mean, I knew I had to include, a few of the big names. I mentioned Harriet Tubman. I mentioned Wallis Simpson. And I also didn't want to repeat just stories that I had in Wicked Baltimore, which also had, stories about Billie Holiday and Betsy Patterson, because it's amazing. By the way, if you know Wallis Simpson and you're like, oh, yes, I've heard of her. She's the one the King of England abdicated the throne for. The would-be queen, right? But she's not the first would-be queen. We have multiple would-be queens in Maryland. And Betsy Patterson, who married the younger brother of Napoleon, but they did that without Napoleon's permission, and it didn't go well. Is just, it's incredible. So I wanted to not repeat myself. I wanted to not just have stories that everybody's read about a bazillion times elsewhere. So it didn't mean they couldn't be somewhere else. And then I wanted to have stories, like I said, that really had kind of like an informal matrix in my head. I wasn't saying, okay, I must have, X number of stories from Wicomico County, or I must have X number of stories from Allegheny County. But I tried to make sure that there was geographic diversity, there was time period diversity, and that it wasn't just all white women. So all of those things sort of did factor in. But most importantly, it had to be somebody with an incredible story. And hopefully you've heard that here today, is that these women, I mean, they're just living their lives. They weren't expecting to be profiled or things, but they just have incredible tales. And it was also fun because they didn't all have to be like women that we're, going to give a big gold star to. Like, there could be some women like Sarah Wilson and others who are just a little more on the dangerous side.
Yeah. And that's an excellent segue. So many notes of praise and admiration for the stories that you've included today. And just a quick shout out, if you want to read more of these stories, definitely check out The Wild Women of Maryland. And read more, because I'm sure there are many that did not get highlighted today that are compelling and interesting. So just a quick thank you again to Lauren for this fun, engaging, and important presentation. Thank you to our partners at the Maryland State Archive and Maryland 4th Century Project. And thank you to Gateway Interpreting for providing accessibility for today's program. Finally, thank you all to our audience for joining us today. And everyone stay safe, take care, and have a good rest of the day.